In the Middle Ages, that was the executioner. Today, it's other professions that live in the shadows, people who deal with death, decay, or punishment so the rest of us don't have to. When those people disappear, history rarely remembers them kindly. But if you listen closely, really closely, you can still hear their story whispering through the centuries. And maybe, that's why we still find executioners fascinating. Not because they were cruel, but because they were necessary. Because they lived where morality and duty collided, and somehow, they kept doing their job anyway. When justice became modern, clean, and invisible, we told ourselves we were more civilized. But maybe, we just got better at hiding the same old darkness. The last known public execution in France happened in 1939. The last in the UK, 1964. And as the gallows and guillotines were dismantled, so too ended a 1,000-year lineage of families who had lived, died, and been hated for doing society's dirtiest work. No tombs. No memorials. Just silence. And yet, deep in old archives, their names remain, written in shaky ink beside the word executioner. Men who stood on stages of blood and smoke, doing what the law demanded, while the crowd watched, or, later, pretended not to. So tonight, as you lie there, eyes heavy, listening to the echo of old history, remember them. The men who walked between justice and sin, unseen and unloved. The last hands to hold the sword, before the machine took over. They weren't heroes. They weren't villains. They were the last visible face of death. Before humanity decided to hide it. In England, things were more secretive. By the early 1900s, public executions had been banned for decades. The hangmen now worked inside prisons, behind heavy doors. The last of them, men like Albert Pierrepoint, were trained to end a life in under 12 seconds. They treated it like a technical job, weight calculations, drop lengths, precision. No emotion. No hesitation. Pierrepoint once said, "I do not judge. I merely carry out the sentence." But even he eventually walked away. He realized that killing, even for justice, didn't fix anything. After years of doing it perfectly, he admitted, it did not deter. It did not cleanse. It only killed. By the mid-20th century, the role of executioner had become a historical embarrassment. Governments wanted the punishment, but not the face of the man delivering it. They wanted it mechanical. Sterile. A machine, not a man. So came the gas chambers, the electric chair, the lethal injection, all designed to hide the human element of killing. The executioner was still there, but behind switches and buttons now. The act of death became administrative. And just like that, the last hangmen, the last guillotine operators, the last executioners, quietly vanished from society. No one replaced them. Their families changed names. Their children moved to cities and pretended their grandfathers had been blacksmiths or guards. The stigma followed for generations, until, finally, even the memory of that shame faded. But let's pause for a second. Because this isn't just a story about executioners. It's a story about us. Every society creates people to do the things it doesn't want to look at. So, what happened to the medieval executioners after they retired? They faded. Into small houses at the edge of towns. Into unmarked graves. Into the margins of history, where the uncomfortable truths go to sleep. And maybe that's fitting. Because for 1,000 years, they carried out society's darkest tasks, quietly, efficiently, and without applause. When the world no longer needed them, it gave them the one thing they'd always been denied. Peace. You're still here. Good. Because this is the part where the story gets eerily quiet. We've seen the rise and fall of medieval executioners, from feared public figures to forgotten names. But before history finally closed the book on them, something strange happened. Something that says a lot about how society changes, and how it hides the things it's ashamed of. This is the story of the last executioners. Let's begin in 19th century Europe, where the hangman's profession was still alive, but only barely. By now, executioners didn't wear hoods or carry swords. They wore uniforms. They signed paperwork. They got their wages from the Ministry of Justice. They were still feared, still shunned, but officially, they were employees of the state. Take France, for example. The Sanson family had ended its centuries-long dynasty. But the post continued, passed to men like Anatole Dibler, who performed over 400 executions with the guillotine. He wore a black coat, took the train to work, and kept a neat diary of every life he ended. He was calm, polite, and professional, the perfect civil servant. And yet, every time he walked into a cafe, people went silent. Even when society stopped watching executions, the ghost of shame followed him everywhere. Some retired into poverty. Others drank. Some tried to reinvent themselves as doctors, barbers, or guards. A few were actually hired by early prisons as disciplinarians, the grim continuity of state-sanctioned pain. And for those who couldn't adapt, they just vanished from the record. A man who had executed hundreds might die unknown, his grave unmarked, his name lost in a dusty ledger. The irony? Those he killed often had more written about them than he ever did. There's something almost poetic about how Europe treated its executioners at the end. For centuries, these men were instruments of the state, then suddenly, they were reminders of something everyone wanted to forget. The rise of prisons, new philosophies about rehabilitation, and changing moral attitudes made them obsolete. By the 19th century, executioner was less of a profession and more of an embarrassing relic. Even their tools became museum pieces. The swords, the ropes, the guillotines, all displayed behind glass, labeled with neat cards, as if they'd never drawn blood. Meanwhile, their descendants, the ones who'd lived in exile for generations, quietly blended back into society. Changing names. Moving towns. Becoming clerks, soldiers, tailors. The curse finally lifted. And yet, something about the executioner still lingers in our imagination, doesn't it? The hooded figure. The raised blade. The uneasy sense that justice always needs a hand to hold the sword. In medieval Europe, that hand belonged to a man who wasn't allowed to look anyone in the eye. And when he finally set the sword down, the world looked away. It's one of those moments where history doesn't end with a bang, just a soft, strange silence. A life lived in service, forgotten the moment it stopped serving. But now, they were different. Charles-Henri Sanson wore fine clothes, read philosophy, and took pride in his work as a civic duty. He even described his role as relieving the condemned of suffering. That's about as close as an executioner could get to moral peace. When the French Revolution began, his services became very popular. And when it ended, and the guillotine fell silent, Sanson retired quietly, a relic of a fading world. The machine had outlived the man. Let's move gently to England, where things followed a similar arc, just with more irony and worse teeth. By the 1700s, England had turned execution into a sort of grim theater. Hangings at Tyburn were attended like concerts. Vendors sold snacks. People brought their kids. But even that began to feel wrong. So in the 1800s, executions were moved behind prison walls. No more public hangings. No more cheering crowds. And with that, the executioner, once a local celebrity, became an invisible figure in the machinery of justice. By the Victorian era, most citizens couldn't even name the official hangman. And when one retired, there were no parades, no farewells. Just silence. Now, let's return to the executioners themselves, the few who lived long enough to see this change. Imagine being part of a profession your entire family has done for 300 years. Then, suddenly, the world decides it doesn't want to look at you anymore. For many of them, this wasn't relief, it was erasure. He wasn't the city's terrifying mascot anymore. He was a bureaucratic function. An employee with a title, not a legend. In Germany and France, by the 1600s, the position had been professionalized. You could even apply for it, though, as you might guess, it wasn't exactly the dream job. Applicants were tested on their precision and knowledge of anatomy, like grim surgeons. And as criminal justice evolved, many executioners started learning Latin and law, because they had to read official orders before acting. They were no longer faceless monsters. They were literate civil servants. Still shunned, but with slightly better handwriting. But the strange thing about history is that it forgets unevenly. While the public was happy to look away from executions, they were also happy to pretend the people doing them didn't exist. Records were quietly lost. Graves went unmarked. And slowly, the executioner, this once dreaded figure, slipped from the spotlight into the fog of anonymity. By the 18th century, the title itself started to change. Instead of hangman or headsman, some cities started calling them masters of justice or public servants of order. Sounds fancy, doesn't it? But it was really just a rebrand. A way of saying, we still kill people, but now it's bureaucratic, so it's fine. Let's pause here and float over to France, again, because if anyone turned execution into an art form, it was the French. By the late 1700s, they had streamlined death into a science. And at the heart of that was one very shiny invention, the guillotine. It was designed, supposedly, to be humane. Quick. Equal. It didn't care if you were a peasant or a prince, your head came off just the same. And behind that blade was, the same family of executioners we met earlier. The Sansons. Paperwork followed you. Old records traveled. And someone always remembered. There's a story, possibly apocryphal, but wonderfully medieval, about a young woman in Germany who married into a respectable merchant family. Everything was perfect until a rival family dug up the fact that her grandfather had been an executioner. Her husband's business collapsed overnight. No one wanted to trade with tainted blood. It sounds absurd now, but back then, that was social death. Let's take a quiet moment here to notice something strange. For all their supposed impurity, executioners were also some of the most hygienic people in town. They had to be. Handling corpses, wounds, and diseases meant they washed constantly. They used herbs, vinegar, alcohol. While their clean neighbors were bathing once a month, maybe, executioners were practically proto-surgeons. But medieval society wasn't ready for that kind of nuance. Clean hands didn't matter if they'd once held a blade. And then there's the psychological side, though, of course, no one called it that at the time. Retired executioners and their families often described feeling marked by God. Some believed their suffering on earth was a form of penance, that being ostracized was divine punishment for the sins they committed in service of the law. Others leaned hard into religion, building private shrines, attending mass secretly, or donating heavily to churches that didn't want them there. It's a kind of medieval irony, the men who served justice became the ones who couldn't receive forgiveness. Let's drift to one last family before we close this part, the Meyer family of Switzerland. They were official executioners for multiple cantons during the 1500s. Their records show a family torn between two worlds. One son tried to become a monk, and was refused entry. Paperwork followed you. Old records traveled. And someone always remembered. There's a story, possibly apocryphal, but wonderfully medieval, about a young woman in Germany who married into a respectable merchant family. Everything was perfect until a rival family dug up the fact that her grandfather had been an executioner. Her husband's business collapsed overnight. No one wanted to trade with tainted blood. It sounds absurd now, but back then, that was social death. Let's take a quiet moment here to notice something strange. For all their supposed impurity, executioners were also some of the most hygienic people in town. They had to be. Handling corpses, wounds, and diseases meant they washed constantly. They used herbs, vinegar, alcohol. While their clean neighbors were bathing once a month, maybe, executioners were practically proto-surgeons. But medieval society wasn't ready for that kind of nuance. Clean hands didn't matter if they'd once held a blade. And then there's the psychological side, though, of course, no one called it that at the time. Retired executioners and their families often described feeling marked by God. Some believed their suffering on earth was a form of penance, that being ostracized was divine punishment for the sins they committed in service of the law. Others leaned hard into religion, building private shrines, attending mass secretly, or donating heavily to churches that didn't want them there. It's a kind of medieval irony, the men who served justice became the ones who couldn't receive forgiveness. Let's drift to one last family before we close this part, the Meyer family of Switzerland. They were official executioners for multiple cantons during the 1500s. Their records show a family torn between two worlds. One son tried to become a monk, and was refused entry. So their wealth became symbolic, a pile of silver in an empty house. Comfortable, but invisible. In some records, we even find retired executioners described as rich and cursed. Two words that don't usually belong together. Let's talk about the children, because their lives tell us how deeply this stigma ran. Executioners' children were born into a social limbo. They weren't exactly criminals, but they weren't clean either. Schools often refused them. Churches banned them. Guilds wouldn't let them train. So most of them had only two career options. Become executioners themselves. Marry into another outcast trade, like knackers, animal disposers, or tanners. It was a closed system. A shadow society. In some towns, these families formed entire executioner communities, living just outside the city walls, near rivers or forests. They even had their own taverns and social circles. A world parallel to everyone else's, but never touching it. And that separation didn't just vanish over time. By the 17th century, records show that even generations after the last executioner retired, their descendants still couldn't hold public office or marry freely. The executioner's blood was considered permanently tainted. Imagine being the great-grandson of a man who died 80 years ago, and still being told, sorry, you can't join the guild. Your ancestor hanged people. That's the level of social permanence we're talking about. Now, occasionally, one family would try to escape the curse. They'd move to a new town. Change their name. Claim to be merchants or apothecaries. But the secret had a way of surfacing. He understood the stares, the whispers, the way people stepped aside when you walked by. And so, the bloodline stayed trapped. Let's float over to 16th century Germany again, because no one documented this strange inheritance quite like they did. Families like the Scharfrichters, literally sharp judges, passed down the role for centuries. Some were so entrenched in the profession that towns built special housing for them, usually right next to the gallows. Imagine that. Growing up with a backyard view of the scaffold. Kids playing tag while their father sharpened a sword nearby. And yes, the children helped. Executioners' sons often apprenticed under their fathers. They learned how to swing the blade cleanly, how to hang a man humanely, how to dismember with precision. It was a skill. A trade. Passed down like carpentry. Just, with fewer wood shavings and more screaming. And the daughters? They had a different role. Many became assistants in medicine, helping their fathers prepare herbal salves and healing concoctions. Others handled the more social side of things, managing payments, keeping accounts, or bartering at the market, when anyone dared speak to them. It wasn't glamorous. But for an executioner's daughter, it was all there was. Now, here's the strange part, these families often became incredibly well off. Executioners were paid per job, and the fees added up fast. Plus, they had side hustles. They sold magic remedies, performed minor surgeries, and sometimes collected bounty money. They had cash. Real money. But they couldn't spend it in normal society. They couldn't buy property in the city. Couldn't join guilds. Couldn't even have their children baptized in the main church. And suddenly, the whispers began again. Retirement didn't mean peace for medieval executioners. It meant invisibility. A quiet vanishing. They lived on the fringes of their towns, haunted not by ghosts, but by memory. By the feeling that everyone needed them, but no one wanted them. And maybe that's the strangest part of all, these men were the instruments of justice, the ultimate servants of the law. But in the end, the law itself couldn't protect them from loneliness. Hey again, sleepy historian. If you're still awake, congratulations. That means you've officially lasted longer than most medieval hangmen's marriages. Because tonight, we're moving deeper into the strange and slightly tragic web that executioners called family life. And yes, it was just as cursed as you'd imagine. So, let's settle back down. Blanket. Dim lights. Maybe a slow sip of something warm. Because it turns out, the loneliness of the executioner didn't end with him. It followed his wife. His children. His grandchildren. For generations. Let's start with the obvious, marriage. Who exactly would marry a man whose job was cutting off heads for a living? The short answer is, someone who didn't have many options. In most medieval towns, executioners could only marry within their own kind. Sometimes the daughters of butchers, gravediggers, or tanners, other people considered unclean. But often, they married the daughters of other executioners. Yes. Executioner dynasties were real. Whole families bound by the same grim profession, generation after generation. It wasn't romance, it was survival. A daughter of an executioner couldn't easily marry a shoemaker or a merchant, those people were respectable. But another executioner? He got it. Executioners like Jack Ketch, who worked under Charles II, became almost like celebrities. But not the good kind. More like that one person everyone knows because of a scandal. Ketch was so bad at his job that people booed him during hangings. And after he retired, no one wanted him anywhere. He died poor and despised, but famous. Even in later centuries, the tradition stuck. Executioners would change their names after retirement just to avoid being recognized. Some would move to new towns and pretend to be butchers or blacksmiths, trades close enough to explain the occasional scar or morbid humor. But the truth always had a way of leaking out. Someone would recognize the face. The name. The hands. Because even though executioners were well paid, sometimes earning more than city officials, no one wanted to trade with them. They couldn't go to the market. Couldn't rent a room at an inn. Couldn't even attend church. They lived in little, lonely houses full of coins and regrets. Let's glide over to Nuremberg, a major city in medieval Germany. They had one of the most well-documented executioner families, the Franz Schmidts. Schmidt's journals are fascinating, and horrifying in a quiet way. He meticulously recorded every execution he performed, more than 350 in total, but he also described treating patients, collecting herbs, and trying to live a normal life. When he finally retired, he applied for something unheard of, citizenship. He wanted to become a respectable member of Nuremberg society. To be seen not as a killer, but as a man who had served the law faithfully. And you know what? They granted it. Franz Schmidt retired peacefully, opening a small medical practice and even becoming somewhat respected. It was one of the rare happy endings in executioner history. But it didn't erase the centuries of stigma that came before, or after. Because for most of them, retirement meant social death. Let's drift to England now, because things there were a little less formal, but just as bleak. You can imagine how that hiring process went. Congratulations, you're not dead. You just get to kill people instead. And so, towns across Europe had these reluctant hangmen, men who'd once been thieves or murderers themselves. And that stigma stuck. Forever. Even when they grew old and tried to retire, the town didn't forget. Old Jacob? Yeah, he used to cut off heads. Don't let him near the church. In some places, like parts of Germany and Bohemia, retired executioners had to live outside the city walls, literally banned from entering town limits except for work. Their homes were usually near leper colonies, butchers, or tanners, other unclean professions. Because in medieval social hierarchies, cleanliness was more about symbolism than soap. You worked with death. You were impure. End of story. Now, let's talk about something that really highlights how paradoxical this all was. Executioners were often the best at medicine. Yes. Medicine. See, since they worked with the human body, in, let's call it a hands-on way, they knew anatomy better than most people. So in many towns, the executioner doubled as the local healer. It's not as insane as it sounds. They could set broken bones, treat wounds, and, most famously, make healing bombs from body parts of executed criminals. Yeah. Gross. But totally a thing. It was believed that the fat of a freshly executed man could cure all kinds of ailments. So if you had rheumatism, you might just pay your local hangman to, mix you up something special. Executioners sold this stuff on the side, and it made them surprisingly rich. Which brings us to one of the weirdest post-retirement realities. They couldn't spend their money. They were needed, desperately. Towns couldn't function without them. Somebody had to carry out the sentence when a nobleman said, "Off with his head." But people also thought they were cursed. Unclean. You might shake their hand, and then someone would whisper, "You know, he touched a corpse this morning," and everyone would just kind of move away. So imagine spending 30 years doing that. And then retiring. What now? Let's float over to France for a moment, because France had some of the most famous executioners in European history. The Sanson family, for example. They were like the Kardashians of the guillotine world. 6 generations of them served as royal executioners, and if that sounds impressive, it also meant 6 generations of being invited nowhere and mistrusted by everyone. Charles-Henri Sanson, who worked during the French Revolution, famously executed Louis XVI. And afterward, he didn't exactly get a parade. He just went home. To a modest apartment. To a life where neighbors avoided eye contact. And when Sanson finally retired, his life became almost eerily quiet. He was still technically wealthy, executioners were paid pretty well, but social life? Dead. Pun intended. Retirement for him wasn't a golden age. It was isolation. Loneliness. And, often, guilt. Because here's the thing. Many executioners, especially in the late medieval and early modern periods, were deeply religious. And when they finally stopped killing people for a living, they started thinking about it. A lot. But let's not get too ahead of ourselves. Before the days of the guillotine and polite French melancholy, medieval executioners had a more chaotic lifestyle. Back in the 13th and 14th centuries, executioners weren't even full-time employees in many places. Sometimes they were criminals themselves, given a choice, be executed, or become the executioner. What happened to medieval executioners after they retired? Hey there, night owls. If you've got your tea ready, or maybe just that one blanket that somehow fixes every bad day, tonight we're going somewhere a little uncomfortable. Somewhere slightly awkward. Because tonight, we're talking about executioners. Yeah. Those guys. The hooded ones. The ones you'd think would just vanish after they swung the axe, or, dropped the trapdoor. But they didn't vanish. They lived. They ate dinner. They had kids. And then, eventually, they retired. And that's when things got weird. Because, in medieval Europe, executioners weren't exactly welcome to the local pub for trivia night. They were, sort of necessary, but also sort of disgusting. Like public toilets. Everyone wanted them around, but no one wanted to see them. So what happened when one of these men, who'd spent his entire career killing for the crown, suddenly had to hang up the axe and live among the people he once terrified? That's what we're exploring tonight. So, dim the lights, take a slow breath, and let's drift back about 7 centuries. To a time when crime, punishment, and retirement planning were, let's just say, not exactly humane. Let's start with something that always surprises people. Executioners didn't usually start out dreaming of the job. It wasn't like little medieval Timmy woke up one day and said, "I want to behead people when I grow up." No. It was often forced on them. In many cases, the role was hereditary. Your dad was the executioner, so congratulations, you are too. It's like the world's worst family business. In some German towns, for instance, the local executioner's family might serve for centuries. Literally centuries. The job passed from father to son like a cursed heirloom nobody wanted to inherit. And because of that, executioners became a weird social group, a sort of medieval underclass that lived with society but never in it.